Member for Cowichan Valley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now that we have the right staff, I'll come back to ICBC. So last week I heard from several autoglass shops in Duncan, and I went and visited Ken Matthews, who owns Speedy Autoglass. They had received a letter from ICBC at the beginning of May announcing that there'd be several changes to what's happening with ICBC, including the changes to the molding allowance program, increase in the NEGS part discount, and the reintroduction of the best price policy. In particular, the NEGS price discount, which is currently at 11% and is going to 25%, is a great cause of concern for Ken and for the other auto glass shops in town. So I have a couple of questions on this. First of all, Ken started with raising the concern that there hadn't been any consultation with the auto glass businesses, and so I'm wondering if the minister can speak to the lack of consultation and then provide an explanation for these changes that have been brought forward.
Mr. Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 2011, there was a Competition Bureau ruling that, intentionally or otherwise, has limited ICBC's ability, I say limited, but it's eliminated ICBC's ability to negotiate rates. It is illegal on the current understanding for ICBC to negotiate rates with material damage suppliers, and that's the industry term for auto body repair, glass repair, and so on. So ICBC is not allowed to negotiate rates. That has obviously presented a significant challenge. There was a pre-existing agreement with the glass repair industry. It had expired a couple of years ago, and the challenge was, now you're in a position where you can't negotiate rates, and yet something needs to be done around increasing average costs for glass repair. ICBC's glass repair and replacement costs have increased significantly from about $40.4 million in 2008 to $96.1 million in 2017. There are two drivers of this. One is frequency. We've talked about distracted driving and issues around increasing claims in British Columbia. I'm sure the members heard a lot of discussion around that. The other, though, unfortunately, is the average cost per claim, which has been going up as well. So as technology's getting better, and as one would expect, the costs are coming down, they are not. There was a challenge in that ICBC was paying for things like the replacement of glass molding, even when the molding wasn't replaced. So paying for something that wasn't actually replaced. There were issues where ICBC was paying in excess of the cost charged by the original manufacturer equipment for a windshield, and the windshield's available from the original manufacturer for less than the replacement windshield is available. One would expect that a replacement windshield is cheaper than the original manufacturer's replacement windshield. So these issues needed to be dealt with. I know the member is aware of the financial challenge we face at ICBC. Nobody is excited about these kinds of things. They have real impacts. The member has named a couple of community auto glass repair firms in her community. There will be additional reforms dealing with auto body repair. It will similarly raise concerns as we cut costs at ICBC. We have had a lot of concerns raised by the Trial Lawyers Association around the reforms related to how we treat minor injuries. They no longer will go to BC Supreme Court. They're going to go to this tribunal. They're going to have a limit on the pain and suffering awards. All of these savings are meant to go to two things. First of all, to get ICBC back into the black. And the second is to ensure that we can provide affordable insurance to British Columbians because the costs at ICBC have gotten out of control. And so that is the key policy change in particular, and also why we're making the changes. And I can say to the member that I am very regretful that ICBC is not able to meet directly with material damage suppliers to negotiate rates, because I think that would be a huge advantage for everybody. And the federal government's Competition Bureau decision and the implications of that limit their ability to do that. However, and there's also a group called the Automotive Retailers Association, and they they engage government on behalf of material damage suppliers. There was a meeting of their glass replacement, is it ARA associated? Yeah, of their glass replacement members with ICBC yesterday. And so discussions can take place between ICBC and service providers, but unfortunately, negotiation about rates cannot. And that may be a distinction without a difference, or it may be all the difference in the world if all you want to talk about is the rates, and ICBC tells you that they're not allowed to do that under the law. I find it very frustrating, but that is the state that we're operating in right now.
Member for Cowichan Valley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's interesting to note that the meeting with ARA happened yesterday, so Ken of Speedy Autoglass just recently got their ARA certification for their business. And I appreciate the Minister's comments about not being able to negotiate rates. In the discussions with ARA, is it possible to look at other ways to mitigate these costs and to address these problems that the Minister has identified? And also, is there some consideration for the impacts of these changes and how they'll affect smaller businesses quite a bit more than they might affect the larger businesses? And can there be any plan to mitigate those impacts to the small businesses, such as the ones that we've been hearing from?
Mr. Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on these policy changes, the policies are the policies, and that is not all. There are additional reforms ICBC is looking at. We have worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers Canada around an operational review of ICBC that identified that its collision repair supplier program could be refined to improve savings to ICBC and service to customers. And so that ARA and the new car dealers and there was another organization, was there?
New car dealers.
Oh yeah, the ARA and the new car dealers association, ICBC, will be in discussions on this, and one of the considerations that ICBC will be looking at is the rural versus the urban situation, which would include considerations in maybe in a rural area it's more likely to have a smaller independent shop. So that's on the table for that tiering discussion. In terms of this specific autoglass policy, though, that is the policy for ICBC going forward. And just so the member knows, I'll go into a little bit of detail about the policy changes specifically. So currently, so there are two main changes. One is around glass material sourcing and discount. The other is around the molding allowance policy. So for glass material sourcing and discount, currently, ICBC pays for replacement glass based on an industry-established aftermarket price index minus an 11% discount. Now, suppliers can source replacement glass from any number of sources, and they can purchase it at significantly discounted rates, well in excess of 11%, which assists them in running their business. But currently, ICBC pays more for glass replacement than other Canadian insurers, including some BC private insurers. So not just an insurer out in Saskatchewan, but BC private insurers are paying less for glass than ICBC. In fact, more than half the time, the current policy at ICBC allows glass suppliers to charge ICBC more for aftermarket glass, as I said earlier, than the same glass from the original vehicle manufacturer. So the new policy is going forward, ICBC will only pay the lesser of either the aftermarket price or the price set by vehicle manufacturers. They won't pay the higher price, they'll pay the lower of those two prices. At the same time, they'll adjust the current discount it applies to the aftermarket price from 11% to 25%, which aligns more closely with what the private insurers are paying. some of whom are using pricing structures that result in discounts of 30% actually. So ICBC is not even at that level. Now, ICBC is also aware of some large glass suppliers in BC that have an agreement with a rental vehicle supplier to do windshield replacement materials and installation for $250, regardless of the vehicle make and model. Now, when they looked at 10 claims involving that supplier, it showed that ICBC paid 126% more. That's $331 per claim than the supplier. So hopefully this will address some of that. On a number of occasions, I can tell a member I receive letters on a regular basis where people express concerns about the difference between when they tell somebody that the windshield is being replaced through ICBC, what the cost is, versus what the cost is if they're paying out of pocket. And the cost gaps are significant. The second big policy change is around the molding allowance policy. So currently, if the national glass pricing calculator that suppliers use indicates that a new molding may be required to complete the replacement, ICBC will pay an allowance of $45.26 even if the molding isn't replaced. So going forward, ICBC will no longer pay for the molding if it's not actually replaced, which seems like a good common sense type of policy for ICBC to only pay for the molding if the molding is actually replaced. So those are the two big policy changes. The projected savings from those are relatively modest in the scope of ICBC's financial concerns. It's about $9 million annually, but we are looking at items big and small to get costs under control at ICBC.
Member for Cowichan Valley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one more. I mean, I really appreciate the explanations here, and that the minister expresses some concerns about some of the practices that have been happening in ICBC, price inflation and this kind of thing. But sometimes what happens when we introduce policies to address some poor practices, it can really impact businesses that aren't engaging in those kinds of poor practices, and they suffer because of maybe the bad behavior of others. And so I'm hoping that there can be some recognition of that impact to particularly these small family-run businesses, and ways to ensure that they remain viable and able to continue their operations, as they are so important in our small towns in particular. So I'm not sure if the minister has anything that he can add or provide, or any thoughts on that, but I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is something that could certainly be canvassed as part of the tiering discussion taking place with the new car dealers and with the ARA and ICBC.